Hi, and welcome to a digital book talk from Massanutten Regional Library. Today's digital book talk is for our middle grade readers. So I have this thing about challenges and looking for different ways to challenge myself to read new and different things. And when I went looking for reading challenges, one of the ones I came across was reading by the decades. So reading in a particular month books that are set in a certain decade. In this case, the books I have today are set between 1910 and 1919. So think about the things that were happening then. We had things like the Titanic, the sinking of the Titanic. We had the women's suffrage movement, and we had World War I. And so that's where my books focus for this month. So in terms of the Titanic, I have picked out two things. First of all, this book is called Unsinkable. It is part of a series of books by Gordon Korman, and it is the Titanic series. This is the first book, and you do want to read these in order. So the order will be Unsinkable, Collision Course, and SOS. In these books, we follow the lives of four teens who become friends and help save one another aboard the sinking ship. First, there is Patty Burns. He's 14. He is a homeless runaway who's mourning the death of his best friend. You see, while his friend Daniel was being brutally attacked, Patty hid. He hid in a crate that was slowly lifted onto the Titanic, and he had no way to get off the ship, so he became a stowaway. Then there's Alfie Huggins. His mother has just left him, so he lies about his age and applies for a steward position on the ship where his father will be working as an engine stoker. And then there's Sophie. Sophie Bronson is the daughter of a suffragist who turns every situation into a political rally. They've been kicked out of England and thus given a police escort to the boat. And then there's Juliana. Juliana Glam is the daughter of the 17th Earl of Glamford. Dad lost all his money. He lost it all gambling. So now he's going to America to sell his daughter off to a wealthy family in Texas. She doesn't know that yet. So the focus of the series is Patty. He's the main character for everything, but we see him in context to all, in relationship, in context to all these other kids. So, as I said, read Unsinkable first, then Collision Course, then SOS. Enjoy. The next one in the Titanic series, well, not in that Titanic series, but in my personal Titanic series, I picked out a Dear America book. The Dear America books span all kinds of date ranges. So if you want to do a challenge where you read from the different decades, this is a series that can help you. This particular book is Voyage on the Great Titanic, The Diary of Margaret Ann Brady. In this book, Margaret Ann is an orphan. She's looking forward to the day when she will have enough money to leave London and travel to America. She wants to travel to America to be reunited with her older brother William, who is already here. She's given that opportunity when she becomes a companion to a wealthy lady named Mrs. Carstairs. So that's how she gets on to the ship. But of course, the voyage on the Titanic in 1912 is a much more thrilling experience than Margaret had anticipated. So those are just two books in our collection about the Titanic. Now, two books dealing with the women's suffrage movement. So this book is part of a series as well. This is from the Sisters in Time series. So another one that, if you want to read through the different decades, can help you find other books for different decades. This is Maria Takes a Stand, The Battle for Women's Rights. It's 1914, and the book is set in Minneapolis, Minnesota. As the war in Europe increases, general hostilities in America also increased, the hostilities towards German Americans. And of course, Maria is of German American descent. She's 12, and Maria Schmidt finds her inspiration in the women's suffrage movement, and so she decides to join the cause. Maria recruits kids from her school to be a part of the movement, to march in one of the parades in town. She is emotionally moved by not only the suffrage movement, but also the plight of the newsboys that she works with kind of secretly, because of course she's a girl and she's not supposed to be a newsboy and deliver newspapers. But she's moved by their plight, that most of them are orphans, the way they are treated by the people who own the newspapers. And so she also sets out to help those boys, help them in their daily life, help them get food. And she finds an adult who is also moved by that and wants to help as well. So not only does she work for the suffrage movement, but she also works to help others as well. And then I have Women's Right to Vote by Kate Messner. This is part of a History Smashers series. So, I had a question for you. In 1920, Susan B. Anthony passed a law that gave voting rights to women in the United States. Right or wrong? Wrong. Susan B. Anthony wasn't even alive when the 19th Amendment was ratified. Plus, it takes a lot more than just one person to amend the Constitution. Did you know that when women's rights activists picketed President Wilson to get his support for voting rights, there were some men who beat the women up, tore down their banners, and stole them. And then it was the women who got arrested. No joke. This book, right here, Women's Right to Vote, this book aims to shatter common misconceptions about how women achieved the right to vote in the United States. Most people learn that the fight for women's rights was started at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848, but the women's suffrage movement began much earlier than that. The author, Kate Messner, details the parts of the women's suffrage that are often overlooked. Why are Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton often portrayed as the face of the movement, but not other women? How did women's suffrage impact black women? If you'd like to know more about women's suffrage, this is a book for you. My third topic tonight from the decade 1910 to 1919 is World War I. And so I have 3 books that I've picked out from that time period. And I've learned some things here. I didn't know about the homing pigeons. So in this book, The Night Flyers, this is by Elizabeth McDavid Jones, and it's from the American Girl History Mystery Series. It's 1918, and our main character is named Pam. She's taking care of the family's homing pigeons while her father is away fighting in World War I. And then this new stranger comes to town, and Pam and others in town suspect that this mysterious man could be a German spy. Of course, he spends lots of money, and that makes lots of other people just like him, period. But Pam doesn't quite trust him. And then when some of Pam's best pigeons start to go missing, she's convinced that they've been stolen, and stolen by the spy. So Pam sets off to prove her theory, but there are more surprises that await her as she travels upriver to prove that theory. So homing pigeons were used in World War I, and they needed people who could actually breed them and train them and get them ready to go into war. That's some of what's happening in this book. Then there are the dogs. So dogs have been used and are still used in the military. And this book We have Darling. So this is Darling, Mercy Dog of World War I. This is also part of a series, the series called Dog Chronicles. It's 1917 in this book. And Darling is a rambunctious family dog. And then the dad of the family gets drafted to the British Army to go serve overseas in World War I in France. And, you know, the dog thinks some things of it, but not a whole lot. The dog likes to run away from home. She keeps doing that. And as the war progresses, England raises certain taxes, like the tax on dogs. And it becomes apparent that most people can't afford the tax, and Darling's family can't really afford it either. And so she is drafted to serve in the British Army herself. And so this story is from the dog's eye view. She goes off for training. She's desperate to return home to her children. And by children, I mean the kids who are her owners. And so she looks for ways to escape at every opportunity. And then she comes upon a wounded soldier. And that's when she discovers her true calling as a mercy dog, searching for soldiers in need. Other dogs in her regiment are trained as messengers, scouts, or sentries, but she's going to travel as a mercy dog with her dog handlers from the Army through France and Belgium toward the ultimate destination of no man's land. She'll quickly learn that the brutality of war, or about the brutality of war, watching dogs and soldiers die on both sides of the battlefield. And then she notes that the hated German soldiers look barely older than the two children who are her owners at home. The story is detailed, but it's not graphic, and it doesn't shy away, though, from the tragedies of battle. But the story does focus on Darling's bravery and her sacrifice and her devotion to her handlers and saving lives. So, dogs being used to help find the wounded soldiers and bring them back. And then our last book, War is Over by David Almond. This one is set in England as well. This is 1918. And in this we have a young boy, John, and his father is off fighting in the war. He's been off in the trenches in France for so long that John feels he can hardly remember what his dad looks like. And John's mom, well, she works overtime in an enormous munitions factory near the town. John can't seem to remember a time without hostilities, when the world wasn't at war. And he's bewildered by his teacher's declaration that, quote, "we are all engaged in the fight to defeat the evil German," end quote. John, he doesn't get it. He keeps asking himself, like, I'm just a child. How can I be at war? And then he sees and experiences other things as well around his town, such as when a pacifist, a person who doesn't believe in the war and doesn't want to go to the war, is beat up by the townspeople. And he imagines things like being transported to the front of the army where the fighting is happening. And he has this dreamlike encounter with a German boy, a boy who's about his same age, same height, and he senses that this boy, like him, is just yearning for peace and waiting for the war to be over. So that is War is Over. So 3 books about World War I. So 3 different topics from the decade 1910 to 1919. World War I, the women's suffrage movement, and the sinking of the Titanic. There are other things out there you can read about in those decades. Whatever you choose to read, I hope you find something enjoyable today. Happy reading.